Okay, welcome to an overview of attachment theory for Dummies. I have a presentation coming up on attachment theory. I founded this meetup called the Seattle Psychology Meetup, and this mic is really close to my mouth. My first talk is going to be on attachment theory. So we're going to go through it. I'm going to go through it from start to finish. I'm going to cover a lot of good stuff. I'm not going to go through it fast, and I'm not going to try and hold your attention. That's not what this channel is. So if you're looking to have your attention quickly tickled, then go to another channel, because this is just going to slowly go through it in depth. So I would say invest in this if you want to learn something. If not, then there's a lot of cat videos out there. Okay, so first of all, why do we want to learn attachment theory? What is the point? Well, first of all, it is a theory, but it has real world implications when understanding this stuff. So for instance, when you start to learn about your own attachment style and you start to kind of see your own patterns in relationships and how they emerge and where they originate from, you can start to make new choices. And it's awesome. When I first learned about this stuff and I was seeing all of the stuff, like seeing my craziness from an attachment perspective, it was like Neo picking bullets out of the air for the first time and seeing that everything is code. It was just a really insightful moment. So great, you can start to kind of look at your patterns and you can start to kind of have a better understanding of where you are from a higher level. But also the whole goal of understanding attachment theory in theory is to make you more secure. And people that are securely attached can enjoy healthier relationships. They enjoy longer relationships. They enjoy higher satisfaction. They enjoy more mental health. They have lower blood pressure. They tend to live longer. Like there is a litany of reasons to have or to try and turn yourself into a securely attached person. Not just for your own mental health, but just, for life in general. It's better to feel secure, and you'll just experience better things. So that's why you might want to learn it. So before we go too deep into it, there's some like fundamental things that we need to understand. First of all, a lot of attachment theory is centered around something called your attachment system. So your attachment system is a biological mechanism that exists in your brain. And basically what the attachment system was built for is it was built for two things. In our, early primitive days when we're on the safari and we're hanging out with saber-toothed tigers and getting eaten up and pooped out, it was way more likely that we would survive if we were in a tribe. So if we're in a tribe, right, then it's the way that we become close to people is to bond with them. So if we're on our own, we're way more likely to get eaten. So that's kind of the bottom line. So in order to promote relationships forming and bonds forming, to promote the survival of the human species, evolution gave us this mechanism in our brain that unconsciously attaches us to people within our proximity. And from an attachment perspective, this happens when you're a child with your mother specifically, or if just your primary attachment figure, usually your mother. But that's the reason that we have it. It's to attach to other humans. Cool. Now, the attachment system is interesting because it's this mechanism that evolved for our survival, and the way that it works is that it's constantly monitoring the safety and availability of your attachment figure. So let's think about it this way. So John Bowlby was basically the founder of attachment theory, and what he discovered is that if you have a baby and you put them into a room with their mom, and then you tell the mom to leave the room, the baby will start to cry. And this is a perfect example of an attachment system turning on. Now, what the attachment system does is it monitors the safety and availability of an attachment figure. So when the mom gets up and she leaves the room, she goes to get Folgers coffee or whatever, right? She leaves the room. The baby starts to cry. Because why? Because the attachment system turned on and said, oh shit, we are threatened. We aren't as protected. We need mom to come back. So what does this lead to? Crying. What's the crying meant for? Well, the crying is meant to get mom to come back because we want to feel safe again. And what Bowlby found out is that you bring the mother back, and and the baby will stop crying, the attachment system will turn off, the blood will regulate, the heart rate will regulate, and it will go back to feeling safe and comfortable. So how does this apply to you? Well, when you are young and you don't have consistent reassurance, like say the mother left, right? And she doesn't come back, or she doesn't come back consistently. What ends up happening is we develop one of two things. We become anxious. We don't know when we're going to be safe and when we aren't going to be safe. So we start to, even when the mom comes back, we start to have two things happen. We can either be anxious in terms of our relationship with our primary attachment figure, which might be, we want to be close, but we're also worried that they're going to leave and we're not really sure. So there's like kind of this pushing and this pulling away. And this is a perfect example of anxious and avoidant. So if you had inconsistent love and dealt with abandonment, or even the opposite, if you dealt with intense enmeshment, then you're likely to have developed avoidant or anxious tendencies. So we'll dive into that a little bit more later, but that's kind of the crux of it. That's the crux of how this works. Whenever you see a little bit of craziness in relationships, or whenever you yourself are triggered, it's because your attachment system is turned on. And the cool thing about knowing about the attachment system is that you'll start to realize that it's not personal. A lot of people think that, oh, well, I'm so freaking needy, man. Like, why am I always so concerned about this stuff and blah, blah, blah? Or why am I always trying to text, or can't stop thinking about him or her or whatever? And the truth is, depending on where you fall on the spectrum, your attachment system might be really, really sensitive. And when your attachment system turns on, it's like you go into intimacy fight or flight mode, if that makes sense. So it's not really you. And oftentimes, if you wait for your attachment system to turn back off, which it eventually does, some people have it chronically on, but it eventually will, then you'll be like, oh yeah, I don't know why I was thinking such crazy shit. And then from an attachment perspective, you're like, oh, because my freaking attachment system turned on, and it was distorting my thoughts, and it was just trying to get me back to a place of safety and availability. Thanks, attachment system. I'm glad that humans didn't die out. Okay, so we have an understanding of attachment. I want to say a couple of things about dependency too. There's this kind of narrative in popular culture that, the ideal way to be is to be independent, self-reliant, taking care of yourself, and, your emotions are your responsibility, and you shouldn't let people affect you to any large degree, or that's going to be associated with kind of a weakness in your personality. And, the truth behind this is that our biology tells a completely different story. Our biology says that we attach to people unconsciously, first of all, and our biology tells us that when we are attached to people, we are more happy and safer, but we're also limbically regulated by them. So what that means is that when we have a proper attachment, our blood pressure can go down, our heartbeat can go down, our hormones get regulated. There's this great study time. Great study. So there's this woman, right? I can't remember what the year was, probably in the 80s, but they ran an experiment on women, and what they did was they gave them a minor electric shock, right? They told them that they were going to give them a minor electric shock, and they ran the experiment in three different scenarios. So in the first scenario, the woman is alone. And they say, okay, we're going to give you a minor electric shock, and then we're going to measure an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is basically like, it's the place where you can measure cortisol or stress or stuff like that. So when the women were alone, and they measured the hypothalamus after the shock, you saw this huge spike. It just super lit up in the fMRI scan. So they were pretty disturbed by that. Now, the second experiment was the woman is now holding a person's hand, a stranger's hand, right? So just holding somebody's hand. They give them the shock, they measure the hypothalamus, and it's way lower. Like, I think it was like about half. I don't know about that. I'd have to double check. But anyway, so we see a decrease, and that's just holding a stranger's hand, right? And then they do the experiment, and it's holding their husband's hand or their significant other's hand. And what we see is this super sharp decline in the person's hypothalamus. So it's like way, way dimmer. And what's the point of this? The point of this is that the dependencies that we form, they ultimately regulate us in positive ways, physiologically and emotionally and psychologically. And the paradox of dependency, or the dependency paradox, is that if you want to become the self-reliant, awesome, super cool person, then you should really find someone to depend on. That if you want true independence, then the way to become truly independent is to find somebody who is dependable and explore the world from that secure place. Otherwise, you don't really have an anchor to go back to, so everything starts to feel scary and there's no real home base for you. So don't buy the hoo-ha about being dependent or whatever. It's not a bad thing. It's totally effing normal. And people are like, I hate it when advice is basically telling you to like associating your desire for love and intimacy with being weak or something. It's fucking stupid. Anyways, cool. We're moving right along, people. 11 minutes. Are you still there? All right. Okay, so attachment dynamics. We've talked a lot, so let's actually get into attachment dynamics now. What are attachment dynamics? Well, basically, it's how attachment styles are measured. So let's think about it this way. We'll get into the attachment styles in just a second. I know you've been waiting a long time. If you've watched 11 minutes of a video, it's amazing. So attachment dynamics is like this. Like, it's measured on a spectrum like this. I wish I could just show you a picture. I'm going to insert a picture in the editing room. So here, inserting picture now. So you'll see that there's avoidance and anxiety. Anxiety has to do with how much we are preoccupied with the state of our relationships. So you'll see that if you're high anxiety and you're low avoidance, then avoidance is how much intimacy you crave or you avoid. So those are the two spectrums. We're dealing with preoccupation with relationships and avoidance or craving of intimacy. And together, those two will form an attachment style. So for instance, if you look at the drawing, high avoidance, low anxiety is going to be avoidant attachment. They don't really think, they're not too preoccupied with their relationships, and they're pretty avoidant of intimacy. So that's an avoidantly attached person. Cool. And then if you look again, you'll see that high anxiety but low avoidance is basically saying this person really wants intimacy and they are all the time tripping out about their relationships and the state of their relationships. So that's a typical anxious person. If you have both high anxiety and high avoidance, then you have a fearful attachment. That's way more rare, but it does exist, aka my mom. And secure attachment is low avoidance, low anxiety. I don't avoid intimacy at all, and I don't really worry too much about my relationships. And you'll end up finding out as we go further into this that secure people are like godsends for the rest of us. They are our best shot at becoming secure ourselves, so says the scientific literature. The scientific literature. That's the truth, but it just sounded funny when I said it. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the 4 attachment types. There is secure, as we said. There's anxious. There's avoidant. There's fearful. Secure is 50%. Anxious is 25%. And anxious is 20%, and avoidant is 25%. That's kind of the rough distribution of people in the world. But you'll notice that if you're on the dating market, which you're probably watching this because you're probably on the dating market, or maybe you're just interested in the topic. But you'll notice that people in the dating market are usually avoidant, and we'll find out that that's because avoidants tend to find a lot of reasons to bail out of their relationships. In fact, one of the underlying principles of being avoidantly attached is being very other-focused. Like, in terms of, like, I focus only on my needs, and when I'm focusing on you, I'm not really focusing on how to meet your needs. I'm focusing on how you aren't meeting my needs. So they tend to bail on relationships really quick, especially when feelings get too feely. So, cool. All right, so let's explore anxious attachment a little bit. I'm going to jump right into it, and then I'm probably gonna insert a little clip here. The first thing that you got to know about an anxiously attached person is that they have a super sensitive attachment system. So we're going back to the attachment system now. The mechanism in your brain that is monitoring the safety and availability of your attachment figures, that mechanism is just like super sensitive, very, very sensitive. And so because of this, anxious people will be able to perceive any kind of slight changes in the amount of closeness that they have with their close relationships, whether it's romantic or friend or whatever. And it tends to make them a lot more, their self-esteem tends to be a bit lower. It tends to make them hypersensitive to criticism or judgment or, intimacy being lost in some way. And it leads to, oftentimes it leads to needy behavior, like perceived needy behavior. So some of the primary motivations of an anxiously attached person, and this is like the healthy ones, the healthy motivations, I would say, is that these people need to know that they're safe. They need to know that that love is consistent and available. They need to be shown affection, whether that's physical or verbal or whatever it is, basically reassurance. These are all really, really good things that end up making an anxious person feel safe. And you can see why anxious and avoidant is just a horrific bond, because they end up doing the exact opposite of what each other needs. But okay, so let's think about this though. So we have this really sensitive attachment system, and in the attachment system, if we think about the kid again, the kid when the attachment system was turned on, he would start crying. So adults do this exact same thing, exactly, but they just do it in more sophisticated ways as an adult. So trigger in an anxious person's attachment system, and something called activating strategies will start to occur. Activating strategies are basically thoughts with the only purpose of the thought is to try and regain intimacy almost at any cost. And usually these aren't the best, most awesome strategies. This is where you see anxious people playing games. This is where you see anxious people withdrawing to try and get the person to think about them or care about them again. Or this is where you see an anxious person blowing up somebody's phone because they just need right now to be reassured. It's because their attachment system is on, and this is leading to anxious activating strategies. And activating strategies always lead to a behavior, and those are called protest behaviors. So if you think about, the strategy when a baby is crying is to get the mother to come back, and the behavior is the crying itself. Does that make sense? I guess you can't really answer, but hopefully that makes sense. So we have these activating strategies, and there's a lot of things that they do in particular. They'll idealize the partner. They'll forget all of the weaknesses. They'll assume that this is the best relationship that they could possibly have, and they could never find somebody better. They'll assume that everything is their fault. And a lot of the behaviors that they'll do is just kind of very, just very oftentimes overly emotional and exaggerated responses to a perceived big issue in the intimacy between the two. Hope that makes sense. So if you want to overcome anxious attachment, there's a couple of ways to do it. Let's see here. Oh, shoot. I got to find my notes on this one. So, ways to overcome anxious attachment is, first of all, you need to be aware that you have this attachment system, and it's a really sensitive attachment system, right? So that means that when you're getting triggered and your thoughts are getting frenetic and you start to feel like you are really destabilized, the first thing that you should think to yourself is, okay, my attachment system is on. I'm thinking distorted thoughts right now, right? Like if I am a car, I'm in the red RPMs and my engine is going to blow up. And in this case, the engine is most likely a relationship. You're going to blow up the relationship with your crazy RPMs. So that's the first thing. So having an awareness that you are being triggered or that you are sensitive in this way and being able to communicate that. The second thing that you should do is you need to show and feel that your needs as an anxious person are legitimate. And this is tough because anxious people, they tend to be really vague about their own needs. They tend to kind of adapt to their partner so much that like who they are and what they want gets lost in the mix. So the second thing to do would be think about like, what is it that I truly need? Who am I truly in a relationship when I am letting my guard down and just deciding that who I am is okay and what I want is okay? And then and then do everything you can to show that truth and to decide like, no, like it's okay to want consistency, availability, security, connection, affection. Those are legitimate things. You're not going to illegitimize my need for this level of intimacy. Fair enough? Okay, cool. And that's not to say that like needing intimacy all the time is like not is something that you should like be super proud of. It's not bad either, but the idea is to be, have a realistic understanding of who you are and what you need. And you'll see that this is okay with the right kind of partner. Step number 3 would be to learn how to directly communicate. So a lot of people have a lot of trouble with this, but specifically anxious people. But the idea here is I need, I feel, I want is a good way to start any kind of sentence. Like I need to feel secure, and when you don't text me for 3 days, it makes me feel insecure. Or I want to be close to you, so I'd like you to come over and cuddle me, or whatever it is. But the idea is to learn how to directly communicate your needs in an assertive, in a non-apologetic, in a way that focuses on your own needs, and in a way that is that's not expecting them to fix you, but more of an informing somebody about what your needs are as an individual. Cool. Another thing, if you want to overcome anxious attachment, is, a lot of anxious people associate love with a roller coaster. So you'll meet like this person, and it's usually an avoidant person, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you meet this person and the sparks are flying. And these sparks to an anxious person, it's like, oh, well, I feel things. I feel all this love and all this intensity. This must be love. And really what you might just be feeling is a really elevated attachment system, right? And having an elevated attachment system isn't love. And this gets into a little bit why some of these relationships become addictive and toxic, because they do produce these really high emotional states. Even if it's negative, it's probably what you were used to growing up. It probably reminds you of the love that you had growing up. So it's familiar, and we usually go towards what's familiar. But if you want to become more secure and enjoy like consistent love and support and all the things that are actually really good for you that you kind of sabotage sometimes, then the idea is to start associating love with a couple of things. You want to associate love with the ability to give intimacy, the ability for a person to have self-awareness, the ability for somebody to acknowledge your needs as valid. And usually those people aren't like bouncing off the walls. They're usually pretty let's just say they're not avoidant. They're not going to want to go into that big roller coaster thing with you. And they usually won't tolerate it, to be quite honest. So again, choose a partner based on their ability to have intimacy with you and to understand who you are and not freak out and run away screaming. And the last thing is to find a secure partner. That's kind of where this is all going. This is the literature is really clear on this. Like, if you want to become secure, you can change your attachment style roughly every 4 years, which is great. I think it's like 25 to 30% of people do that anyways. But if you want to do it quicker and you're serious about this, you're serious about wanting to kind of mitigate the effects of your more anxious behaviors, and the idea is to find somebody secure and learn from them. And what happens is this thing called limbic regulation, and it's where you get around somebody, you will start to sync up with who they are and how they think and how they like their physiological levels of excitement. And as you feel somebody that is secure, that is comfortable being close to you and comfortable being independent, you'll start to emulate those behaviors just by proxy. So, it's like you're the summary of the 5 people that you hang out with most. That's kind of what it's like. Cool. And that should be good for anxious attachment. Let's talk about avoidant attachment. You sons of bitches. Avoidant attachment is not what I am at all, but it's what I've dated in the past, and it kind of took me down this whole thingamajig. And understanding this was like a godsend to me because, quite frankly, it's like you don't, as an anxious person, you assume that avoidant people are just awesome. Like there's something about the lone wolf and someone that's hyper self-reliant and independent and not really needy of you or your affections that is like, it's like mysterious and kind of intoxicating. Really, we'll end up finding out that it's none of those things. It's another kind of it's another strategy to prevent being hurt by love. It comes from the same thing, and we'll find out that through experiments they've measured that avoidant people have the exact same physiological issues at childhood that anxious people have, and even into adulthood. But what they do is they repress it. It's different. Anyway, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about the anxious person or the avoidant person's attachment system. So let's go back to the baby analogy, right? What they found out is that when mom leaves and mom comes back, the baby's fMRI scan is measured. The parts of the brain that light up in the baby, those same parts light up the baby of an anxious baby. Those same parts light up in an avoidant baby, but the difference is the behavior. So the heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, hormones get a little bit out of whack. All those things happen in an avoidant person, but they don't show anything. They've learned to suppress it. And usually the way that they suppress it is they disassociate. It's crazy. I know that sounds so crazy to anxious people. And some avoidant people are like, yeah, whatever, And by the way, avoidant people tend to have really high self-esteem, which is interesting. And I think that being able to be responsible for yourself and be self-reliant is fucking awesome. So there's a lot to be learned from avoidant people, but secure people can do all those things and have love too. And ultimately, the avoidant way of going about relationships, it stops you from having the joy of caring for somebody and putting somebody's needs above your own. There's like a real union in that. And they want it. You'll see that one of the things that avoidants do is they'll date somebody, person will want to get close. They'll be like, oh God, this person wants to get close, and they'll bail. And then after their attachment system turns off, their repressed attachment system or suppressed attachment system, they'll start to think, oh, I fucked that up. Why did I break up with that person? That person was really kind. And then they might send a text message like, hey, what are you doing? Or whatever. So, cool. So, but yeah, deactivating strategies, there's lots of them. And some deactivating strategies would be that avoidance uses either being hypercritical of a certain aspect of their partner. Also, the myth of the one. They think, oh, this person just must not be the one. What's some other ones that they do? They tend to view their partner as an encroachment on their independence. So a lot of the fundamental motivations of an avoidant person is to stay independent. So they want this love and they want this closeness, but they also want to be independent. And if somebody starts to get close to them and their attachment system turns on, they think, oh shit, this person's fucking with my autonomy. I'm not interested. So there you go. Cool. And we already talked about this, but intimacy is perceived as a threat to independence, even though when their attachment system is on, all of the same physiological stuff is going on. They just suppress it. So, yeah, if you want to be somebody, if you're an avoidant person and you're aware that you're avoidant, admittedly, I have a lot more anecdotal evidence of being anxious, but if you're avoidant, there's a couple of things to consider. First of all, you want to consider the idea that mutual independence or mutual dependence is actually a good thing. And the reason that you want to consider that it's a good thing is that your all of the things in life that you probably want, like, life satisfaction and better physical and emotional health and, good, healthy relationships and even higher income and like all of these things are usually achieved by finding a good partner. And it's the literature is super, super clear on that. Like married people tend to live longer. They tend to have less cancer. It's like, it just goes on and on and on and on. So being mutually dependent on somebody is a deep and enriching experience that also just happens to have the added benefit of making you healthier and live longer and more satisfied with life and have more meaning in your life, or more perceived meaning in your life and stuff like that. So that's one. If you're avoiding attachment, another thing that you should start to consider is that being independent and self-reliant it's not a good thing to only be that. And it's a lot of avoidant people tend to view their independence and their self-reliance and their ability to isolate or cut themselves off from others as a strength. And the interesting thing too about this is that it can be perceived as a strength, but ultimately, if you look at it from a higher level and over the long term, it's anything but that. It is preventing you from getting these things that you deeply want. And the reason, and you can't really, it's easy to think that it's not something that you want. But if you look at your behavior most of the time as an avoidant person, you'll notice that you're seeking this thing, but when this thing really gets close, you're finding reasons to disconnect from this intimacy. But then you'll start to go back for it. But then you'll find reasons to go away from it. It's this weird cycle that avoidants do. So what was it? See the value in mutual dependence. Stop seeing being completely self-reliant as a good thing. Open up your emotions to people is huge. Embrace your emotions. Avoidance, one of the key things that they do is they kind of suppress their emotional needs. Well, it's a deactivating strategy, but essentially they aren't. It's not real easy for them to be vulnerable with their feelings about somebody or about something, because that opens them up to being hurt or being or not really being independent. That's really what it comes down to. But you should embrace these emotions, and because when you express with somebody who you are, what you fear, or whatever it is, it creates intimacy with that person. And another thing to think about would be learning how to communicate effectively instead of just deactivating from your partner. And that might mean that you need a little bit of extra time to yourself. Or that might mean knowing how to communicate what you need without reverting to denigrating or kind of putting yourself above your partner and making it their fault, if that makes sense. Because usually anxious people, secure people and avoidant people, they can get together, but it usually doesn't last very long. Anxious people and secure people usually end up together, but avoidant people, they tend to... Oh, and by the way, this is really late in this conversation, but avoidance basically developed as an attachment style biologically to promote survival in harsh conditions. So there is a biological component to anybody's attachment style. It's genetic, biological. It is influenced by life, and it's also influenced by our initial experiences. So we can later on refine our attachment style. Our parents can have a huge influence on our attachment style, and so can our genes. Cool. And finally, but yeah, if you're avoidant, also date a secure partner, because they usually have just a sixth sense for this stuff, and they can kind of say like, hey, are you sure you really want to be alone? Maybe you need a little cuddle or whatever it is. So, start welcoming more intimacy, start being a bit more vulnerable. Embrace your emotions as much as you can, and drop the need to always be in control of how far your partner is from you. All right, I'm getting burnt out. It's been 35 minutes. Should I talk about secure people? Yeah. The bottom line is secure people are awesome. If I could summarize all of this, date a secure person. It's really it. They tend to have the relationships that last the longest. If you need independence, they'll give it to you. If you need closeness, they'll give that to you too. They'll regulate you. They'll teach you super good habits. They usually know how to communicate really well. They are relatively in control when shit's hitting the fan. They can be composed. They will embrace their emotions and show you how to communicate them. If you're anxious, they'll do it in a healthy way. If you're avoidant, they'll just show you how to do it in general. They're not afraid of being vulnerable because they assume positive intent from people because they've experienced it as a child. So they'll be vulnerable with you and like, hey, I like you, and if you don't like me, so be it. But I need to be honest to myself and you because whatever. Like they wear their emotions on their sleeve, right? And they welcome intimacy. So yeah. How could we end this? I guess that's really it. I've burned out. This was 35 minutes talking. If anybody watched this whole video, you are awesome. And good luck in your relationships. That is an overview of attachment theory for dummies by the book Attached by Amir Levine. Super great book. Taught me a lot. And good luck out there. Relationships are complicated. They're super hard. They're super rewarding. They bring most of life's meaning to our doorstep. And if we can improve our ability to act in them and form them, then our life is going to improve in parallel. So cheers, and see you at the next video, whenever the hell that is. Probably have to take a vacation from this video. All right, goodbye.